Hello, my name is Mary Steffel, and I'm here to present some research on ethically deployed defaults that I've conducted in collaboration with Eleanor Williams and Ruth Pogacar. Marketers and policymakers alike are increasingly leveraging defaults to influence consumers' choices, in some cases to promote the consumer's society's best interests, but in other cases to promote the interests of the party instituting the default. Defaults have been used to promote individual and societal well-being by increasing organ donation, retirement savings, nutritional eating, as well as pro-environmental practices. But it's also been used to help businesses profit from consumers by encouraging consumers to disclose personal information to online retailers, to agree to costly overdraft protection plans, and to encourage consumers to enroll in subscriptions to magazines and email lists. Perhaps unsurprisingly, default's ability to covertly guide consumers' choices has raised concern about how to use defaults ethically. Some consumer advocates have suggested that disclosing how defaults are intended to influence consumers' decisions could help protect consumers from being covertly manipulated by defaults. Others have feared that disclosing the intended influence of defaults could undermine their effectiveness and could undermine defaults intended to actually promote consumer and societal well-being. So this raises the question, can transparency provide a solution for protecting consumers from defaults that are designed without their best interests at heart, while without jeopardizing the effectiveness of defaults designed to serve the interests of consumers or society? This is a question that my colleagues and I set out to answer. Together, we've conducted a series of studies looking at how transparency affects the influentialness of defaults. In one study in the domain of energy conservation, we asked participants to imagine that they're moving to a new apartment complex and that they could either opt in or opt out to a variety of energy-saving amenities. We disclosed to some of our participants that the default was chosen to either encourage them to get more of these amenities, or standard amenities were set as the default to make consumers less likely to sign up for these energy-saving amenities. In another study in the domain of privacy permissions, we asked participants to imagine that they had just joined a new social network and could share a variety of posts, photos, or personal information, either by default or by opting in. We disclosed to half of our participants that the social network designed the choice purposely to make them more or less prone to share their personal information. And finally, in a field study, we gave away hot chocolate that either came with or without whipped cream by default, and we either did or did not disclose to our participants that the default was designed to make them more likely to choose a more healthy drink or a more indulgent drink. In all of these studies, we got the same result. Regardless of disclosure, people were much more likely to choose something if it was the default. Namely, they got twice as many energy-saving amenities, they shared a third more personal information, and 90% more of our participants got whipped cream when it was the default than when it was not. Although transparency did not reduce the effectiveness of defaults, upfront disclosure did improve people's perceptions of the fairness of the default, their perceptions of the ethicality of the default setter, and their willingness to work with that person again in the future. This is encouraging news for those who might be hesitant to disclose the intentions behind defaults for fear that it might make them no longer effective. It shows that businesses and policymakers can do so with transparency, and that disclosure may even improve default setters' reputations with consumers. However, it does suggest that disclosure alone is not an effective means of consumer protection. Defaults still guide consumers' choices even when they're preceded by disclosure of their effects. So what can consumer advocates do to protect consumers from being exploited by those who might use defaults to profit off of them? Well, to make consumers less vulnerable to the influence of defaults, it's important to understand why defaults are influential in the first place. One of the most powerful reasons why defaults are so effective is that they serve as reference points to which other options are considered. This has the effect of making people more likely to focus on the advantages of the default and the disadvantages of switching, And this tendency is rooted in basic perceptual processes over which people generally don't have a lot of awareness or control. So disclosure may not matter because once people view a default as a reference point, they may not understand what to do to counter its influence. So then what can be done to protect consumers from being exploited by defaults that were designed to benefit the default setter at their expense? Well, the solution is to supplement disclosure with an intervention that targets reference dependence directly. We instructed participants to think about why they might prefer the default versus the alternative and write down what was important to them before they chose. After all, if what's happening is that the default is leading people to focus on the default almost exclusively, encouraging people to simultaneously consider why they might prefer the alternative might help people to engage in a more balanced consideration of the options. And indeed, when people did this, they were less likely to focus exclusively on the default and more likely to opt out of defaults designed to benefit the default maker at their expense, and were more likely to opt into options ostensibly designed to benefit society. What I hope to leave you with today are 3 insights that you can use to effectively and ethically deploy defaults. First, setting a recommended option as a default is a powerful way to nudge people to make choices that might be in their own or society's best interests without forcing them to do so. Second, the intent and potential influence of defaults can be disclosed for transparency purposes without reducing the potential benefits of defaults. Doing so may allay concerns regarding the ethicality of deploying defaults without the awareness of those being affected. And finally, default disclosures offer insufficient protection when defaults are not designed with consumers' interests at heart. Rather, a more active intervention is needed. Encouraging consumers to articulate why they might prefer the default or its alternative before choosing can help diminish the effect of defaults serving only the interests of the party instituting them without reducing the potency of defaults designed to nudge consumers' choices to serve the greater good. So what's the impact of this research? To help people in the public and private sectors ethically and effectively engage with the defaults, we've disseminated this research to shareholders and stakeholders beyond the academic community, to business leaders, policymakers, and the general public. In our outreach to the general public, we wrote popular press articles for Scholarly Insights, the AMA blog, Policy Shop, the Behavioral Science and Policy Association blog, and The Conversation, which was also reprinted in Fast Company. Our piece in The Conversation generated over 114,000 views in the first week of publication and was named one of the top 4 essential reads in behavioral economics in 2017. We also wrote a practitioner article for Harvard Business Review and offered a webinar on how to nudge your customers without pushing them away, which shares insights from our research on the power of defaults and how marketers and policymakers can leverage defaults to improve consumer well-being. And finally, we presented this research to the White House Social and Behavioral Sciences team, to the Office of Evaluation Sciences at the General Services Administration, as well as to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. In part, based on this research, I was invited to serve as a fellow on the White House Social and Behavioral Sciences team, as well as on the Office of Evaluation Sciences for several years. And there, what I've done is I've applied these insights to help to design policies and programs that better serve consumers with transparency and with regard to understanding what influences their choices. I've also consulted for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, Health and Human Services, and the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy on how to design disclosures that can better support consumer decision-making.